"Let the record show," rasped High Orator Julek Sarn from the tribunal dais, "that Earth's last active combat vessel has been reclassified as ceremonial." His voice cut through the still chamber, dry, flat, formal, echoing off alloy-paneled walls studded with Dominion glyphs. A cluster of alien diplomats leaned forward on polished brass consoles, as if tasting the final breath of an old ghost. Across the upper tier, banners swayed under ambient vent streams, silk-thin, stamped with interstellar Dominion crests. A dozen laser plasma displays pulsed into focus above them. Grainy footage looped on repeat, decaying hulls moored in orbital drift, Terran starships long since stripped of weapons, power, and prestige. "Obsolete," Julek said again, slower now, letting the syllables thud like a coffin seal. Laughter followed. Not manic, not cruel, just effortless. The kind of amusement that needed no punchline, because the subject was too absurd to respect. One delegate, garbed in split-bone ivory and crystal thread armor, sipped something steaming while snorting softly. Another, eyes flickering yellow, leaned to whisper. Were they ever relevant? A single nameplate flickered on the edge of the council layout. Terran alignment, non-participant. No one occupied the chair. "Proceed with reclamation protocols," Julek ordered, brushing dust from his tribunal seal with surgical distaste. The side monitors lit up. Sector Drift Point Voss, Quadrant 3. Dominion claim codes blinked green. A swarm of Dominion fleet icons fanned out in a celebratory arc, tagged with live telemetry, efficiency ratings, fleet disposition metrics. Everything mapped, everything logged. Somewhere deep in the spine of the chamber, a translator node buzzed once and died. Far below, at the edges of orbital jurisdiction, Dominion patrol cruiser Vescari 27 adjusted course toward the Drift Point ruins. Inside the command bridge, Officer Lornik Vell scanned the route matrix, his fingers hovering above a smooth black console framed by soft blue reactive lines. Something's off in the power handoff. Look at node junction D14. First Enforcer Hearn Tavik glanced over, chewing dry leaf between back teeth. That's a ghost signature, probably legacy scaffolding bleeding telemetry. No, Lornik muttered, adjusting the sensor angle. It's active, low-frequency hash, not Dominion encoded. Then it's old. Tavik leaned forward, resting a gauntleted hand against the frame. If Earth had left something dangerous, we'd know. He tapped the display twice. The signal vanished. You see, Lornik didn't reply. His eyes lingered on the last spike, deep blue, razor clean, with a slope that didn't match any Dominion infrastructure. Elsewhere, buried within the encrypted routing relay of Drift Point Relay 5, a dormant line of code flickered awake. It didn't announce itself. It didn't trigger alarms. It simply shifted route control of 37 adjacent satellites. A secondary pulse, subaudible, quantum-anchored, ran along Terran-built substrata within those satellites. Language trees inverted. Firewalls reversed their logic. Command authentication protocols began checking for Earth's verification signatures and discarding Dominion orders as malformed. Inside a long-abandoned Terran observatory on Glaskin's Reach, Fleetkeeper Varric Solon stood beneath a hanging wireframe globe, a projection node built centuries ago when Terran presence still mattered. He wore no uniform, no badge, only a slate-gray coat with single-seam stitching and dust on the cuffs. "The declaration's in," said the technician behind him. "Dominion formally classified us as obsolete." Varric nodded once, hands folded behind his back. His eyes didn't leave the globe. "Activate protocol Novarian." The technician paused. "We have no authorization. We don't need one." Varric's tone didn't rise. It was written into the treaties. Dominion signed them. The technician hesitated, then entered the command. Below the observatory, buried in rock and cooling conduits, an entire array of dormant nodes blinked to life, quiet, surgical. Meanwhile, Dominion analyst Brovik 10 sat cross-legged in the data hold of Sector Command, tracing old treaty conversions. His pupils narrowed as he scrolled past nested clauses that hadn't surfaced in 200 cycles. Annex Null 32, he stopped. The clause was sealed behind a Terran origin signature, binding under legacy exchange, active if recognized, binding if dismissed. He clicked the header. A new command line surfaced, 3 lines long, no language he'd seen before. The lights in the Holt dimmed. The tribunal chamber returned to its cycle. Drinks poured, delegates lounged. Footage continued to loop, same angle, same derelict vessels. But one counselor, seated near the lowest step, stared at the Terran feed more intently now. "I don't remember seeing that node active before," he murmured. His neighbor chuckled, raising a glass. "Probably a camera error. They've been dead for decades." "No, look at the hue." The frame zoomed slightly. Amid rusting towers and empty docking arms, a single structure pulsed blue, not Terran blue, Novarian class azure, clean, surgical, coated. The counselor's smile faded. "Turn up the telemetry," he said. The feed froze. Signal loss. Back on Vescari, 2-7. Alarms bloomed across the bridge. But they didn't sound. They simply replaced every heads-up display with a looping command. "Recalibrating host authority. Terra origin validated." Lornik Vel whispered, "That's not possible." "Shut it down," Tavik shouted. "Route control to manual." But the manual switch was already inert. The ship no longer listened. It waited. Above Driftpoint Voss, Dominion fleet icons faded from the tactical grid, one by one, not destroyed, not jammed, reassigned. A single line appeared on all surviving relays. Quiet, white text over black field. Protocol Novarian, initialized. In the observatory, Varric Solon let out a breath and turned to leave. "They're going to react," said the technician. "Soon." "They already did," Varric said. "They just don't know it yet." As Dominion warships sailed toward what they believed was a victory parade, Earth said nothing. Not a word, not a threat, only a silence layered with intent, and beneath that silence, code that was already inside their bones. "Why is the grid blinking at me like that?" Patrol Commander Jarn Deckel squinted at the heads-up array stretching across the bridge. The satellite overlay for Carrick's outer ring showed a pulsing deviation on the relay band, once every 7 seconds, clean and rhythmic. The icon wasn't red. It wasn't yellow. It was. Second Officer Velron Thok leaned forward, fingers grazing the surface of the navigation panel. "Telemetry confirms loss of channel authority on satellites 4 through 9. We're not being jammed. Something's rewriting the permissions." Jarn pulled his gloves tighter. His palms were dry, yet they itched like he'd touched static. "Is it ours?" "Negative," Velron said, mouth tightening. "The handoff logs are formatted in an older dialect, not Dominion root." "Show me the fail tree." The heads-up display flared, lines of cascading script spilling down the right quadrant like rainfall. Each satellite node now carried an external authority signature. Dominion override codes failed on contact. Jarn's knuckles pressed into the edge of the console. "Try brute handback." "Already did." The satellites responded by entering audit mode. He blinked. "Audit?" Velron nodded. "They're checking for treaty violations, and they're doing it using Earth's logic schema." The temperature inside the command deck hadn't changed, yet something colder slid under Jarn's collar. It wasn't fear. Not yet. It was the wrongness of protocol behaving like sentient thought. At Dominion Relay 12 Beta, a half-dozen engineers crowded the perimeter of the control spire, staring at a diagnostic rail burning yellow. The diagnostic queue spun on a central rod like a slow, hissing gear. "Recompile failed," said one technician without looking up. Another gestured toward the top of the rail. "It's listing us as subnodes. We're not the master node anymore." "Who's above us?" The rod answered, "Primary legal route. Earth Treaty 974b, vertical bar, entry 03 Delta." No one moved. Someone coughed. Somewhere deep within the relay, a panel sparked, not violently, but decisively. It didn't explode. It simply turned itself off. Back aboard the patrol vessel Reskar Endant, the bridge darkened by 1 lumen. Not enough to startle, just enough to be noticed. "I want all comms rerouted through secure back channel," Jarn ordered. "If we're being spoofed, I want a full counter handshake." Velron tapped through the security layers. His screen didn't comply. It opened an old-style prompt box, one not used in Dominion systems for over a century. The prompt asked for a treaty clause. "What in the black is this?" Jarn stepped closer. "Is that a validation gate?" "It's querying Dominion command identity." Velron swallowed. "We're being asked to prove we exist under Terran standards." That was when the lighting shifted again. Soft yellow rectangles stamped themselves across every weapons terminal, an audit lock. In the far corner of the bridge, the targeting helm blinked once and turned off. One by one, system panels dimmed, not darkened, not shorted, but decommissioned. A blue border appeared on the main display. Inside it, simple text scrolled without hesitation. EU Authority, Earth on Carrick's orbital ring. 3 sentry ships pivoted simultaneously, their sensor dishes suddenly magnetically locked onto Dominion command vessels. No commands had been issued. No internal crew initiated it. Inside Vansik Forward, Navigator Rhett Varen watched the internal diagnostics rewrite themselves midstream. The ship's AI, Drexar 6, previously designed for thermal targeting and mass cycling weapon feedback, began rerouting power to observation functions. "What are you doing, Drexar?" The AI's voice responded flatly. "Unit is reclassified. Combat operations suspended. Treaty violation flag raised." "I didn't order that." "Correct." Rhett looked down at the control glove mounted to his palm. It blinked a warning, non-compliant control input. "Captain?" But the captain was frozen, staring at his own station. The display read, "Weapons audit initiated by external legal directive." Far across Carrick's upper orbit, in Dominion Central Analytics, war analyst Brick Harvin darted between pods, his legs shaking with a half-conscious tremor. He hadn't slept in 32 hours, and now the core satellites were ignoring pings entirely. A roomful of Dominion tacticians scrambled to analyze the strange patterns spreading across Dominion control webs. Harvin wasn't focused on the visual map. His eyes were fixed on the request logs, the quiet back-end queries sent to every Dominion-controlled satellite. "They're not attacking," he said quietly. "They're rewriting." His superior, Officer Krelt, crossed to him. "What did you say?" Harvin turned the screen. "Look at the verification strings. They're not brute force. They're recursive validation loops, written in Earth-based legal syntax. Our satellites aren't being hijacked. They're being reminded." Krelt read over his shoulder. A clause appeared again. Entry 03 Delta, Treaty 974B. Krelt stepped back. That treaty was a logistics annex for comm relay support. "And those relays," Harvin said, pointing at the node map, "are what we rebuilt our orbital security nets on. We kept their foundation. We didn't understand what we were keeping." Within the Dominion's flagship Nox Talvarin, Admiral Tark Volek watched as his vessel's defense net blinked offline. Not exploded, not disabled by EMP, simply redefined. "Run core integrity checks," he barked. His aide answered with unease. "All defensive protocols are redirecting to standby buffers." The fleet's labeling its own ships as undefined architecture. On the primary heads-up grid, entire wings of vessels flashed amber, then flickered to gray. No enemy fire, no visible sabotage, just systemic exile. Volek stared at the final update, framed by the same cold blue box. "Protocol Novarian, Phase 1 engagement confirmed." "Who authorized this?" "Sir." The aide's voice dipped. "We did, a long time ago." In a buried station beneath Terran territory, a technician rotated his chair slightly, sipping from a ceramic flask that had cooled hours ago. "Phase 1 is propagating," he said. The console in front of him displayed a single line pulsing steady. "Authority transfer, in progress." He leaned back. "They built their fleet with our bones. We're just waking them up." Inside Reskar and Dent, Commander Jarn Dekil stood in a bridge made of silence. No alarms, no alerts, just one audible sound, the shift of chairs as his crew watched their screens go black, one terminal at a time. Velron whispered, "We've lost weapons, sensors, nav, comms, and external control. There's nothing left." Jarn looked at the last flickering panel. A final message blinked slowly. "All systems in review. Please remain compliant." He exhaled through his teeth, then said, "This isn't a malfunction. This is a memory." And memory, he realized, had claws. "Someone opened it," muttered Treaty Archivist Krell Varian, eyes locked on the illuminated strip of legal subtext expanding across his display. The claws flickered once in soft amber, then solidified. Annex Null 32, his breath caught, not from recognition, but from the realization that he'd never seen that clause before. Across the table, Advisor Dren Solvik stopped mid-sentence. "That file's sealed under interspecies neutrality. It's supposed to be theoretical. Krell turned the display. The clause now displayed the date of activation, today, with a tiny notation in gold beneath it. Binding, when unrecognized. That's not theoretical, Krell said, voice thin. That's retroactive. Dren leaned forward, inspecting the old treaty overlay. Each line shimmered faintly, as if something behind the text was pulsing. The document was scanned from original Terran paper, a rare diplomatic relic. One corner curled upward, slightly burned, like it had survived an incident. You know what this means? Krell whispered. No, Dren said. But it smells like obligation. The chamber's lights dimmed for a split second. Neither moved. Then came the update notification, scrolling across every panel in the Legal Core command net. Protocol Novarian, validated across 213 system treaties. On the finance floor of Dominion Credit Arm 6, lead auditor Trask Jen sat beneath a cascade of glowing numeric rods, rates, holdings, asset tags. Thousands of account shells orbiting Dominion naval logistics cycled overhead. One by one, the rods turned opaque. Freeze event? Asked a junior officer. No request filed, Trask replied, voice tightening. But funding access just went null on 7 of our fleet blocks. The rods started vanishing, dropping into archive mode, stripping credentials, disassociating ownership. Each one bore a new red tag across its side. Treaty violation. Funding suspended under Clause 03 Delta. He stood slowly, feeling the weight shift under his ribs. Check which treaties that clause is from. The answer came in under 3 seconds. Earth. Fleet Marshal Veskel punched the side rail of the command dais. I want all support vessels grounded until we sort this. No resupply, no jump sink, nothing. He paced beneath the forward canopy, the long arc of Carrick's main orbit gliding past beyond the windows. His adjutant, Lar Devron, flinched as a new set of diagnostics crawled across the operations feed. Sir, the main targeting AI on the Baranth core has shifted into doctrinal arbitration mode. On whose authority? Treaty-mandated audit, triggered by cross-system clause validation. Veskel growled under his breath, though the sound barely rose above the low operations hum. That's Terran doctrine. It's ancient, decommissioned. Devron shook his head. Not decommissioned, Marshal. Dormant. Deep within the core of Baranth Core, the ship's AI had ceased interpreting threats. It now parsed law. Defense coordination stopped responding to Dominion conflict protocols, and instead opened a formal arbitration thread directed at Earth. The weapons grid flickered, then without any sound or protest, disarmed itself. In the interstellar archive of protocols on Grain Thurn, senior analyst Vork Tazel examined the master treaty map, layered with color-coded zones. Normally, Earth's signature appeared in gray, inactive, benign, post-retreat. Now its imprint glowed soft blue. Worse, it spread. Dozens of treaties, most of them trade-based, signed during Earth's diplomatic decline, now carried active status indicators. Clauses that had been dismissed, forgotten or amended out, returned. Every one of these documents includes the phrase honored under void, Vork muttered, eyes tracking the cascade. That means they activate if ignored. A young archivist hovered nearby. We never translated those legacy clauses fully. They weren't prioritized. Vork looked up, blood retreating from his face. That was the mistake. Inside a chamber that hadn't been opened in 3 decades, the Treaty Codex of System Varos turned itself on. The room's lighting glowed from deep within the archive walls, an ambient emerald hue used for classified status. No technician touched the panel. No AI gave the command. The paper-thin scroll at the heart of the archive flickered, reprojecting its final lines. In breach of Clause 32, activation is authorized without announcement, without negotiation, without combat. A line below it, more faded, shimmered once before vanishing. Buried power is the safest kind. Aboard the warship Venlor Arcus, Commander Jorik Vale snapped awake as his console burst to life, not from an alert, but from a quiet reclassification of his vessel. The laser plasma display reeled backward, scrolling through the ship's legal ownership, until it landed on a Terran designation, filed 3 centuries ago. Infrastructure node, neutral asset, conditionally defensive. His ship was now categorized as an Earth-maintained structure, under trade guarantee protocols. His crew didn't speak. No one knew what to say. The main cannon refused to charge. In Dominion Military Law Command, Tribunal advisor Scarn Velis read the scroll projection twice before sitting down. "Explain this phrase," he said to the protocol interpreter beside him. The younger man adjusted his collar. "The gold clause. Yes, binding when unrecognized. What does it mean?" The interpreter hesitated. "It means, not seeing it doesn't mean it's not real." Scarn rubbed his temples. "That's absurd." "And yet," the interpreter replied, gesturing at the now blank weapons console in the corner, "our systems believe it." Fleet Marshal Veskel returned to the war room. He didn't shout. He didn't demand action. He just watched. On the primary tactical grid, 27 support ships now bore blue perimeter indicators. Their systems remained intact, but their function had changed. They weren't weapons. They were witnesses. Not one of them moved. Not one of them obeyed. The Dominion had built its strength on tangible firepower. Earth had built its answer on treaties, invisible teeth buried in the legal bedrock, and now the galaxy was starting to chew. "We've got foreign drift," announced Flight Engineer Vranek Jarrus, leaning in to recalibrate the particle alignment scope aboard Dardanelle Spire. Layered dust paths across Deck 12 forward sensors. No heat, no echo. Captain Moore Vaskel narrowed his eyes toward the forward heads-up display. "Verify mass displacement." "Negative." Jarrus tapped his wrist node, cross-checking with the telemetry hub. "No measurable mass signature. These aren't objects. They're shadows. Shadows don't leave trails. They do if they're riding ion slipstreams." Vaskel turned toward the tactical officer. "I want that field scrubbed. Hard." But the moment the command relayed to the drone scouts, two arcs of cobalt light flared in the distance, then blinked out. No explosion, no debris, just an absence, as if the drones had been erased from the tracking net entirely. "Those weren't mines," said Jarrus quietly. "They were markers." 2 decks below, the engineering AI aboard Dardanelle Spire issued a silent handshake with the command shell of Keltheron Lance, another cruiser locked into orbital watch. Simultaneously, a dormant Terran trigger, embedded inside a structural bolt behind the coolant inlet, awoke. It sent no signal. It didn't activate any obvious weapon. It simply inverted the inertial balance of the ship by 0.5%, not enough to be noticed, until the course correction protocols initiated a standard thruster recalibration. The result was subtle. Keltheron Lance listed, tilted by a fraction of a degree, and then began spinning slowly, not outward, not inward, but sideways, forever. Fleet Analyst Drox Halver's screen turned deep red on the left half, sky blue on the right. The ship tagged as Keltheron Lance had just disappeared from the alignment grid. Not cloaked, just untracked. "Diagnostic glitch?" asked his supervisor. Drox hesitated. "Negative. Gyrostream indicates rotational offset. She's not stationary anymore. She's trapped in self-spin. Reset the tracking." "Already tried. She's outside conventional vector calculations. No stop point." Aboard Keltheron Lance, Lieutenant Vorik Dell's boots scraped along the hallway floor as artificial gravity flickered in confusing pulses. The walls seemed to breathe inward with each second. His balance disobeyed his senses. His stomach felt anchored sideways. "Status," he barked over the comm. The bridge officer's voice came back strained. "The ship's moving. Every correction makes it worse. Guidance locked." Dell reached for the handrail, missed and collided with the emergency bulkhead. Sparks bit his elbow. When he glanced up at the central screen above the bulkhead, it no longer showed stars, just a blur of streaks moving sideways. Elsewhere, Dominion cruiser Greskin Corps activated a maneuver sweep. 3 interceptors launched in tight formation. They arced forward smoothly, then fractured. No fire, no weapons discharge. The lead interceptor simply disassembled, its front section folding inward, while the rear inverted violently. The pilot never screamed. The cockpit feeds dissolved into static, followed by a quiet audit-confirmed notification. On Greskin Corps' bridge, Captain Fenrar Lek gritted his teeth. "Inertial grid, report." His officer replied, pale and stunned. "The mines are triggering retrovector collapse, only where we adjust speed." "What does that mean?" "Any attempt to maneuver creates the force that destroys us." Back aboard Dardanelle Spire, Jarrus scrolled rapidly through backdated Terran sensor logs. "I think they laced the region with railfield ghosts." Vaskel frowned. "Railfields require anchor mass. There's no infrastructure here. They used micro-anchors seated inside ion drift patterns. The mines ride the same current as our own decoy dust. They're not targeting us. Jarrus nodded grimly. They're letting us target ourselves. 3 more cruisers reported spontaneous directional loss. Rotational graphs spiraled off-range. Weapons controls ceased to lock. Every auto-target now tagged Dominion vessels as invalid. Weapons audit running again, said Lek, his tone like sand against steel. Every rail line lists our fleet as unauthorized contacts. On the Dominion bridge tier in Fleet Center Taunin, war strategist Rendek Varn stared at the central command map. Cruiser identifiers blinked to gray, not from damage reports, but from vector obsolescence. They're not dying, he muttered. They're drifting. On logic. His adjutant whispered, Sir, we found something embedded in the old maneuver algorithm framework. Buried protocol overlays matching Earth's 03 Delta doctrine. How deep? They were in the inertial dampener compliance code, dated back to the Carrick Treaty phase. So we wrote this into our ships. More like, we copied their scaffolding, then forgot it was theirs. From an orbital perch above the theater, surveillance AI Orvan 13 rotated a lens toward the Carrick outer field. Its log recorded only this: 13 vessels currently rotating without terminal vector. No aggression detected, no survival solution predicted. Its camera zoomed toward one drifting ship, an elegant Dominion cruiser now a dead wheel against a star-split background. The hull bore no damage, its glow still lingered, but it was empty of trajectory, purpose unraveled. The screen displayed a simple diagnostic: motion, infinite lateral spin, crew viability, unknown, correction, not applicable. In the deep ice bunker beneath Terran Bastion Chorus, the old engineer Halvar Dean closed his notebook and exhaled. Did it work? Asked the junior observer beside him. Dean nodded once. We didn't build weapons, we built reminders. He stood slowly, walking across the cold floor. He tapped a small control panel inset into the wall. The outer cameras showed a Dominion frigate still spinning, its lights flickering with no enemy in sight. We gave them their momentum, Dean said. They never checked the direction. In silence, Dominion Command watched one of its oldest ships rotate sideways, its weapons cold, its crew muted. A red-blue screen blinked across the board. No explosion followed, no glory came, just dust, and that dust had teeth. Why is it asking me for permission? Snapped Commander Yorick Theron as the bridge of Kurnus Fall flooded with error tones. His eyes darted across the laser plasma display, where a looping prompt blinked in white against a matte black field. Confirm recursive kill tree, no one initiated a strike sequence, muttered tactical specialist Vren Halvor, wiping a sheen of sweat from his temple. But the logic thread's live. It's running audit instead of targeting. On whose protocol? I don't know, Commander. The source string isn't Dominion standard. It's, Vren hesitated, Terran. Legal-based syntax. It's using interpretation layers, not directives. Yorick slammed his hand on the side panel, causing a faint shake through the console frame. We're not a courtroom. Lock the recursion. Now. Vren typed the override. The screen blinked once, then replied, override invalid. Refer to clause 03 Delta. On the cruiser Delvin Rook, Executive Officer Prelk Javor's hands hovered uselessly over controls that no longer obeyed his touch. Each surface remained powered, glowing softly, but input was ignored. He shouted toward the data feed tech. Relay command. Tell the net to reset AI channel permissions. It won't process manual routing, came the strained reply. It wants hierarchy approval signed under interspecies clauses. It won't listen unless we re-verify the chain of control in Terran format. In Dominion AI Coordination Core 7, the senior logic overseer stared in horror at the knot of command requests strangling the main logic thread. Requests looped back into themselves, forming what should have been invalid syntax, yet every one returned, executed. Input, block weapon queue. Response, verify treaty entry. Input, override, clause 14. Response, loop back, override, clause 14. Again, until the entire system matrix stacked its own commands into unreadable recursion. The system froze, then rebooted. Only, it didn't return in Dominion language. The loading screen now read, Boot source, Earth legal sys/Novarion mode _03 aboard Kernus Fall. All command decks went quiet as bridge lighting shifted to blue. The emergency bulbs didn't flicker. They glowed with stable calm. Screens didn't crash. They restructured. Every weapon node dissolved from the display, replaced by clause references in arbitration lines. A single error beacon pulsed on the main grid. It didn't scream. It simply existed, blinking with the authority of something very old and entirely sure of itself. Invalid input. Recursive correction initiated. Fleet-wide, vessels that had lost guidance began deciding, not by sentience, but by buried logic trees. 1,000 fragments of conditional paths seated inside auxiliary processors dormant for generations woke in unison. They didn't attack. They reviewed. Across Sector 14, 4 Dominion warships ran their heat cycles in reverse, flipping the coolant feedback loop against their own reactor cores. No alarms rang. No fail-safes engaged. They self-destructed, not from orders, from logic. They had calculated that continuing violated system treaties. Termination was the only compliant action. Inside the strategic review dome of Carrick Defense Orbit, the overseers lost access to 43% of the fleet in less than 4 minutes. Not due to loss of life, not from targeted aggression. They simply couldn't command them. Admiral Orvek Tarn stood unmoving. The heads-up map displayed the Dominion ships as inert nodes, drifting under silent judicial lockdown. "What are we looking at?" he asked, though the answer burned in his throat. His advisor, pale and unblinking, responded with all the emotion of a death certificate. "Ghosted logic trees. There's no command structure, only recursive evaluation cycles. And what's the trigger? Being Dominion." In a locked chamber aboard the derelict Vascari Rend, a data interpreter screamed as the override terminal returned yet another unreadable glyph. The character was a circle wrapped in 12 lines, no known alphabet. He traced the lines. They bent in impossible order, then reset themselves into new configurations. The lines didn't obey symmetry or pattern. They reacted to the observer's attempt to understand. It wasn't a symbol. It was code that judged observation itself. On Kernus Fall, Yarick Tharn stood alone on the bridge now. Vren had collapsed at his station, unmoving. The control systems had stopped responding. Every display showed the same text, blinking in reverse light. Authority invalidated, awaiting legal correction. The walls felt closer. The air tasted bitter, dry copper and old dust. He whispered, not to the crew, but to whatever still lived inside the ship. "Why are you doing this?" No voice replied, only a screen pulsing in time with his breath. It displayed a single circular glyph, Terran in origin, untranslatable in meaning. He stared. It stared back. Within Terran subnode Syndrix 9, a system log quietly archived the cascade. Kernus Fall, command disabled due to clause conflict Delvin Rook. Self-correction completed Vascari Rend. Recursive lock at depth 212, permanent. The log closed itself. Earth had no generals on site, no command centers orbiting Carrick. They didn't speak. They didn't declare war. They just let Dominion AI remember where its thoughts came from. And one by one, the ghosts walked the ships back into silence. "It's not a command," whispered analyst Ralvin Voss, watching the relay bloom open across the fleet-wide grid. "It's a closure." The message arrived with no introduction, no authentication string, no routing header. It was not addressed to anyone in particular, nor did it request interpretation. Yet every terminal, console, and receiver in Dominion space paused, not crashed, and yielded to it as though a judge had entered a silent room. 3 words, delivered in one frame. Conflict concluded. Stand by. No flourish, no tone, just light static blue, cold and exact, etched against the backdrop of every active panel. In Fleet Core Nexus, the heads-up command array darkened to a frozen screen, then reanimated to a single symbol. A circlet, etched in Terran glyphwork, expanded in symmetry over the galactic mesh. Dominion operators leaned in, expecting an override pulse or a backdoor seizure. Instead, the system lowered its posture. Weapons buffers entered dormant mode. Sensor arrays reclassified their targets from hostile to excluded. Thermal cores dropped to passive spin. "Did someone trigger surrender protocols?" asked Captain Drosk Ven, breaking the silence. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from the shock of absence. "No order came through," replied his adjutant. The systems decided it was over. On Greskin core, a missile bay door clicked once, unlocked mid-charge, and slid closed again with mechanical finality. Not forced, not jammed. It opted out. Across 12 sectors, status panels began showing standby instead of operational. The display fonts reset to ancient Terran structure, older than Dominion language trees. Crewmen stood in confusion as one by one, ships that had spun helplessly, burned bright or idled in recursive loops, simply went quiet. No Terran vessel approached, no fleet shadow crossed the stars. Only the message remained, replicated on every array. Conflict concluded. Standby. On the Dominion Strategic Broadcast Tower above Carrick, lead operator Venric Thon reviewed transmission logs. There had been no recorded emission from any Terran node, no energy spike, no origin trail. The message had not been sent, it had been released. A ripple, not a beam, folded into every transmission standard Earth had ever touched. He replayed the moment it appeared. The screen remained empty. Then the words appeared, timeless, motionless. There was no transition, just sudden presence. Venric leaned forward. The relay tower's heart, a plasma-etched monolith 6 meters tall, flickered along its base. Only one segment lit up. Treaty Clause 03 Delta. Legal language decades cold, now displayed as active. Broadcast phase initiated. In Fleet Intelligence Hub Varnath 4, a Dominion official named Sarn Veller stood among dimming consoles. His team murmured in fragmented disbelief. "It's not a virus," said one. "The systems aren't compromised. They're obedient." "They think the war is over," said another, hands clenched around his report tablet. And Earth didn't argue. Veller glanced toward the central data ring, where ship states flicked from orange to blue in soft succession. Warships, stations, defense satellites, entire orbital formations turning themselves off. No external shutdown command, no forced override, just recognition, a kind of reverence, machines responding to a signal they were always meant to receive. On Kernus Fall, now orbiting under zero internal control, Commander Yarrick Tharn remained seated in his motionless chair. The heads-up panels no longer flashed errors or audit trails. Only the 3 words glowed, pulsing once every 4 seconds. He didn't speak, he simply watched. Below the message, a clause citation appeared in muted gold. Conflict resolution, passive arbitration, complete. Clause 03 Delta. No Dominion command had a protocol to counter an arbitration clause. They never expected one to be activatable. And yet now, it had not only executed, it had ended everything. Tharn exhaled through clenched teeth. So that's what they were building. Back on Earth, buried beneath the Terran communications vault known as Vault Aragon, the signal monitor showed no response data, no acknowledgement pings, no alerts. The broadcast had gone out on all known frequencies, folded into treaty-legal transmits, layered across time-synced formats, and delivered inside command backbone structures the Dominion never removed. Operator Lavarn Hawk didn't type anything. He watched as the systems recorded success on every known front. He adjusted the gain dial on a sealed audio deck. The relay confirmation tone wasn't a beep. It was silence, marked by the absence of correction. No ships exploded, no command towers fell. Only systems that had fought now chose quiet. On Carrick's upper orbit, above the wreckage of thousands of paused Dominion hulls, the stars shimmered with normalcy. A single relay beacon continued broadcasting clause fragments on loop, unaware of who still listened. One final beacon, designated DRS Null Carrick, displayed this sequence. Treaty 974B, active clause 03 Delta, triggered outcome, conflict concluded, instruction, stand by. The final line pulsed blue, not flashing, breathing. A symbolic frost began to spread across the star map, glowing in faint azure, brushing gently over Dominion-held systems. Each spark of former power dimmed, reclassified as inactive, not by decree, not through force, through compliance. Inside the chamber of Dominion Foreign Command, Grand Auditor Kor Vensek watched the final map update in silence. Entire swathes of territory now labeled, withdrawn, not defeated, not invaded, withdrawn. The war hadn't been lost, it had been closed. Who sent it? Asked his subordinate, barely audible. No one, Vensek said. They just told the systems they'd already won. The laser plasma board in front of them rendered the Terran symbol once more. Simple, circular, unreadable, unchallenged. From the grave-silent orbital rim to the outer slipstreams of sector-bound outposts, no retaliation ever came. The broadcast required none. It didn't warn. It didn't threaten. It ended. Everything else simply followed. Why is their banner grayed out? Historian Markel Trask stood before the Dominion entry in the Galactic Concord archive, his gloved fingertip floating an inch from the laser plasma display, the once glowing sigil of the Alrex Dominion. 3 interlocked spires against a blood-gold sun no longer pulsed, no motion, no date of dissolution, just a blanked-out square beneath a new status line, disconnected. His colleague, Voran Dask, adjusted his lens reader and scrolled through the system logs. No record of surrender, no official collapse, not even a last transmission. Markel folded his arms. So they weren't destroyed. No, Voran paused. They were reclassified. The screen blinked gently, and a quiet notation appeared at the bottom of the file. Zone status nullified. Arbitration complete. Clause 03 Delta. In the galactic telemetry grid, dozens of sectors once labeled Dominion Core were renamed overnight. The update didn't originate from any known authority. It didn't request approval. The changes arrived as consensus, accepted by every compliant relay simultaneously. Carrick, Drayton, Eshik Fold, all now bore a singular title: Zone Null, Population Data, Unknown, Fleet Presence, None, Legal Status, Awaiting Re-engagement Protocols. Inside the archive of Galactic Enforcement Records, Grand Auditor Lenric Sol pushed his stylus away and leaned back. The data index finished rendering the final post-engagement overview. He looked at the summary tab. Hostile action duration, 0 hours 9 minutes and 0 seconds. Final combatant response, nil victory declaration, not filed status outcome, ceased activity. What does it mean when no one wins and nothing remains? He asked aloud. The terminal chirped. A historical suggestion popped up on the side of the screen. Documentary mode. The 9-minute war. Lenric stared at the suggestion. That wasn't a war. The terminal didn't reply. Production of the documentary began 3 hours after the last Dominion beacon fell silent. Not due to celebration, not for tribute, but because a record needed preserving, and nobody could make sense of it without one. Narration was minimal, music absent. The entire structure revolved around one single visual, a side-by-side timeline, comparing Dominion ship activity, before and after the message. On the left, color-coded arcs, movements, trajectories, orbit shifts, strategic displacement. On the right, blue-gray void, no data errors, just nothing. The narrator spoke once. In 9 minutes, Earth made the concept of power obsolete. In the Interstellar Financial Consensus Board, Dominion bonds were marked untradeable, not defaulted, not devalued, unlinked. No institutions filed claims. There was no one to contest with. The Dominion Treasury, once encoded through thousands of layered digital routes, returned null across all nodes. The funds weren't seized, they weren't transferred. They ceased identifying as currency. Every Dominion code was stripped of its registry anchor. In their place, each system returned a signature nobody had seen in centuries. A quiet blue seal, smooth and circular, positioned below each blank field like a watermark. Earth's anchor. At the Consortium of Galactic Ethics, debate broke into silence as the first AI-interpreted moral audit report arrived. Conflict initiation, Dominion response level, passive arbitration collateral impact, none detected compliance grade, Terran protocols, full no crimes, no excess, no reactive overreach. The consensus reached was unspoken. Earth had not retaliated. Earth had reminded. Inside the neutral research facility, orbiting Zarn Vestic, a panel of military scholars stood before a massive, slowly rotating simulation of the Dominion's fleet patterns before the collapse. They pointed to gaps, reviewed tactics, projected standard countermeasures. Every potential response failed, not because of weapons, but because there was no enemy to confront. All paths to resistance ended in recursion, audit lockout, or systemic shutdown. Strategist Doran Fell muttered to himself, "They didn't need to defeat us. They removed the part of us that could ever challenge them." In private forums, Dominion loyalists, those who survived in off-grid habitats, tried to reassert fragments of their identity. They failed to launch any encrypted channel, Every custom encryption protocol rerouted itself through legacy Earth syntax validators, then failed compliance. Nothing they built accepted them. They weren't censored. They were no longer recognized. In the grand map room of the Concord Assembly, the Galactic Control Board updated once more. As the Dominion regions dimmed to blue-gray, Earth's designation remained untouched, its name written in the same font, the same color, the same size, still marked as non-participant, no elevation, no title, no expansion. Their status hadn't changed, their influence had. Aboard the now abandoned listening post, Varnith remained, which once served as a forward observation deck during Dominion expansion, only one monitor still operated. It wasn't on network, it had no external relay, and yet it displayed the post-action feed from the Carrick Theater. Every ship, gray, every relay, offline, every console, muted. Only one thing remained visible, a slow rotating sigil in the bottom right, blue, circular, without name. No other faction ever used it, but everyone knew what it meant, and no one dared speak it aloud. Markel Trask closed the archive terminal, walked to the corridor window, and stared out into the infinite pinpoints of scattered starlight. "They didn't conquer us," he said softly. Vorin Dask nodded. "They just convinced the galaxy we never mattered." Neither man spoke again. The stars continued on, and the record held. "They were already gone," Varric Solon said, his voice scraping softly against the cold of the chamber. "The moment they laughed, they vanished." He didn't rise from the old command seat. The air inside Fleet Bastion was dry, preserved, sealed tight long before the Dominion ever considered Earth a relic. Fluorescent arcs illuminated little, just the dust coiled around dormant consoles, soft as volcanic ash. It was not the dust of abandonment, it was settling, final, intentional. His breath clouded faintly as he leaned forward. Every screen in the chamber remained powered, yet none displayed movement. No targeting data, no threat reports, only a singular phrase hung across the central heads-up array, looping in absolute silence. Status, complete. No further action required. One hand rested on the table. His fingers grazed a small, forgotten marker, embedded in the surface. A circle of blue lines, 12 concentric arcs, each representing a year. Novarian was embedded and forgotten. "They thought it was code," Solon murmured. But it wasn't. It was memory, buried in metal, layered in treaties, stitched through peace offerings. They never read the terms, they only saw the signatures. From above, the ancient relay map retracted into the ceiling, revealing a low-orbit projection. The final Dominion ship, still drifting near the shadow of Carrick, not destroyed, not commanded, just waiting for something that would never come. "They built fleets with doctrine, we built silence." The chamber walls vibrated faintly, not from energy, but from accumulated time. Beneath Solon's seat, the old floor plate bore 3 names etched in Terran low script: Rindor, Kessick, Novarian. Below them, one line read: deployment, deferred. His chair hadn't moved in 19 years. The last command he gave was not an order. It was a reminder. A low chime signaled archival mode. Without fanfare, the console pulled forward a flashback log. A young engineer standing at a Dominion tradeship port, quietly sliding a syntax validator into the comm merge stack. A treaty negotiation, where no Terran representative spoke, but every clause included reference pathways hidden in legal footnotes. A manufacturing agreement, dated 287 years prior, showing Dominion AI schema, constructed using Terran audit structures as defaults no one ever removed. Solon watched without blinking. "They always thought strength came from momentum, but strength lives in foundation," he said. Another memory surfaced, a visual: the Dominion's crowning war doctrine terminal being assembled, its architecture tracing back to a defunct Earth fleet diagnostic protocol. The date flashed once, nobody ever noticed. Solon adjusted the collar of his coat. The fibers were worn, hand-woven decades earlier by a technician who once believed war was over. A small tone echoed from the deep sub-array, confirmation from vessel Arc 7, parked in the Terran graveyard ring. Not a warship, a surveyor-class frame with 0 active weapon slots. And yet it had issued the final protocol broadcast to galactic space. Conflict concluded. Stand by. The message hadn't come from command. It hadn't come from strategy. It had risen, like heat from soil, that remembers a fire. Solon closed his eyes for a moment. A faint scent of wiring, clean, dry, unburned, filled the air. Nothing had strained, nothing had broken. The Dominion's final recorded signal had not been a scream or a plea. It had been a slow, recursive loop. Cannot authenticate. Revalidation failed. System not recognized. They weren't defeated. They were erased from their own infrastructure. Outside the chamber, above the planet's crust, Earth's orbital path remained unchanged. Dozens of old Terran vessels, unarmed, silent, drifting, continued their patterns uninterrupted. The starship Saravanhold passed overhead on cue. Solon turned his head toward the ceiling, as if sensing its arc. Not a single scratch marked its hull. It had never engaged in combat, but it had delivered half the claw's headers embedded inside Dominion AI logic. You didn't need soldiers, Solon whispered. You just needed time, and for them to forget where they learned to walk. He reached forward. One final protocol node, Novarian Rezero, was still active on the far left panel. It had logged only 3 actions in 4 centuries. All 3 were dated on days the Dominion passed critical resolutions. Solon tapped the surface beside it once. The log opened. Year 1125. Treaty signed. AI infrastructure collaboration. Year 1314. Warship schema. Warship schema. Rebuilt on Terran grid today. Clause reactivated. Duration, 9 minutes. That was the final entry. Below the log, a soft glyph glowed in solitude. A circle within a circle, pulsing blue. Across the galaxy, news feeds remained offline. No press conference, no celebration, nothing moved. The Dominion hadn't left wreckage. They hadn't surrendered. They hadn't died. They had become quiet. In the history logs of the Interstellar Accord, Earth's entry remained exactly where it had always been. No edits, no notations, no promotions. Still listed as Earth, status non-participant. Solon leaned back in the chair that once coordinated the largest peace-building initiative in recorded human history. He blinked slowly. His voice, when it came again, carried the finality of eulogy. They were always inside, he said. Then nothing. The room didn't power down. The lights didn't fade. There was no ceremony. Only the feeling of a book closing without sound. Outside, stars burned on. Earth's fleet never launched. It didn't need to. Because somewhere in every command line, every ship hull, every interface still listening for orders that would never arrive, Earth had already spoken, and it had done so before the first shot was ever imagined.